Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. In this update, we're going to break down the weather pattern over the next couple of weeks so you can plan ahead and know what to expect. So let's start off with the overall temperature anomalies and kind of take you back over the last 2 weeks. And you can actually see we've seen below average conditions across a good part of the southern plains, and that's compliments of a much more active subtropical jet stream down there in that region. And we also have another pocket of area that has also experienced below average temperatures to average temperatures across the eastern side of the US, and that is compliments of much more easterly flow. Then we've got ridging that's really built over the top of the Pacific Northwest back into Canada, which is a lot of sinking air, and that's actually swung into portions of the upper Midwest with those well above average and much more drier conditions for the upper Midwest. So, and let's take you back just for the last 30 days. You can actually see, again, much of the area across the southern plains have been average to slightly below average, while a good part of the Northeast and good part of the East Coast has been overall for the last 30 days slightly below average, while at the same time much of the Pacific Northwest has been above average. And that's completely the opposite of what we saw this time last year. So this is your temperature anomalies back when we were in that third year La Nina, and we saw completely the opposite. We had a below average temperatures up there in the Pacific Northwest, while much of the southern plains and much of the subtropical jet stream was a lot less active, and you had a lot of sinking air and ridging down there in that region, and that saw well above average temperature anomalies. So we're seeing the transition of the different stages from that La Nina to the El Nino that we're going into. Look at the temperature anomalies where they were this time last year. So we saw that huge cool area down here in the equatorial Pacific that was shutting off that much, the active subtropical jet stream down here in the southern branch. The polar jet was more active, and that put the cooler temperature anomalies across the Pacific Northwest. And now we see completely the opposite, right? We've got that transition. We're coming out of that third year La Nina. We're headed into that down in end zone neutral setup right now, transition into that El Nino with those well above average temperature anomalies down here in the equatorial Pacific. And then we've got the ridging, the warm blob in the North Pacific Ocean. That puts the ridging over the top in a good part of Canada in our northern states and across the upper Midwest, while the much more southern branch is on the cooler and wetter side. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns on North America, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel. And if you're in the market for a weather station, I definitely highly recommend the Tempest Weatherflow weather station. It's the one I personally have had for the last 3 years. I feel it's the best one on the market. The cool thing about it is it's all solar. It's a 5-in-1 system. It literally takes like 10 minutes to install, has a convenient app and a desktop version. You can be a part of the 45,000 other in the Tempest community. And I do have a discount code if you'd like to purchase one of these for a great gift for Father's Day that is coming up. 10% discount and free shipping at checkout. So here is the link, and I'll actually have that in the description below so you can easily click on it and possibly order one for yourself. But let's start off with the overall satellite picture where we stand right now. So we've seen this active area of low pressure center down here in a good part of the southeast. That is that little tropical type low that we've been kind of talking about for almost a week now on this channel, with the ridging building over the top, lowering the pressures, and it's still there. I mean, it's still just kind of sitting and spinning. And finally, I do feel it's going to finally come on shore. That probably won't be until Sunday and Monday timeframe, with increased rain opportunities for a good part of Virginia, back into the Carolinas there. But heading into the middle part of the country, we've seen this persistent blow up of storm development across eastern portions of the Rockies down here in good part of Nebraska into the Texas Panhandle. We've seen persistent mesoscale systems blowing up in that region, and then they travel down off the northwest flow, and we're going to see this kind of persistent setup really kind of going forward. So if we take a look and look at that low pressure center off the southeast coast, yeah, the National Hurricane Center's got a 10% probability of it forming into some sort of tropical entity. I don't really think it has time to do that, but it definitely increases the rain opportunities down here across a good part of the Carolinas into a good part of Virginia and even West Virginia as we move in deeper into your Memorial weekend. So here's the setup on the severe threat going into today. So again, this is very active setup across the middle of the country, blowing up storms, slight to enhanced risk across a good part of Montana, back into Wyoming, and then further south, we've got that enhanced risk across portions of New Mexico and far west Texas, even a tornadic setup later on this afternoon into the evening time frame. But you can see where the low pressure is, increased rain opportunities down there in portions of Florida, and that finally starts to ease off the east coast here on your Friday, and that moves inland a little bit going into your Saturday for your Memorial weekend. That puts rain opportunities for a good part of South Carolina as well as in North Carolina, while we see that same persistent flow kind of blowing up. We've got the dew point surging into the 60s from West Texas all the way to Canadian border, and these are diurnal heating type thunderstorms. They blow up in the heat of the afternoon, and then they travel down the northwest flow, and they tend to fizzle out in the overnight and morning time frame. And that's exactly what we're going to find on Saturday. We find ourselves in the same similar type setup on Sunday, where we have storm systems blowing up across the middle of the country, and we should see this be persistent, slight to enhanced risk setups pretty much on a daily basis across this region. So where these lie, these could be definitely some big time hail producers, some strong wind gusts, and the further south back into the Texas, then somewhere they could be looking at some isolated tornadic spin ups, as well as we have that low pressure center going to be entering a good part of the southeast with increased rainfall by then heading into portions of West Virginia. But for the rest of the country, we've got a lot of sinking air and a lot of ridging of high pressure, and it's very difficult to squeeze out any precipitation in that atmosphere. So really where that low pressure center, that's where the rain opportunities are going to lie. And most of the heaviest precipitation, I think, again, stays offshore, while you still could get some multi-inch totals across portions of South Carolina and North Carolina, trying to sneak into portions of Kentucky and parts of West Virginia. But really all the action is across the middle of the country, back into West Texas, Western Oklahoma, Western Kansas, back into Wyoming, back into Montana, and then you've got that ridge of high pressure with that sinking air across a good part of the upper Great Lakes and to the Midwest. So, but let's take you out to the West Pacific, because man, we've got a powerful super typhoon out there. In fact, it peaked yesterday at 185 miles an hour. The pressure dropped below 900. This is rare territory. In fact, 897 millibar. And this is the second strongest typhoon in May down there in that region in the West Pacific. Very intense typhoon. Luckily, when it went over the island of Guam, it was going through in a kind of an eye wall replacement cycle, so it definitely wasn't as intense. Now it's actually into the open waters, and it's expected to remain in the open water. So here it is on the big picture. So this is going to continue to shift and head towards Taiwan, but it's going to be able to recurve, and that's going to make a significant change actually in our weather, or at least setting up the overall pattern going forward for our weather heading into the first part of June. So let me break down the details for you. So here's the overall setup and where this path is going to go. So it continues to shift and lift further off, heading towards Taiwan. But all indications are, a lot of on ensemble guidance, it's not going to make it to Taiwan. It's going to be keeping out in the open water. So that is definitely a good thing. This is not expected to actually hit land, but it is going to be expected to recurve. If we look at the overall GFS ensemble guidance, that's just going to continue and then make that right hand turn heading into your about in about another week time frame. So after Memorial Day, this is going to be recurving and heading towards the Aleutian Islands up there in Alaska. And this is, you can see, this is 168, beyond a week. So in the next 7 to 10 days, it's going to be heading up into a good part and eventually heading up to the Aleutian Islands. And what that's going to do in setting up the stage for our weather pattern going into the first part of June is, again, that's going to kind of fizzle out over the Aleutian Islands, but it's also going to force the ridge again over top. So make those above average temperatures for a good part of Alaska into the Northwest Territories, or a good part of Canada, and that's going to allow and pretty much kind of reactivate that much more subtropical jet stream further to the southern branch. So you're going to see this more kind of persistent, kind of cooler flow. So these areas are going to have increased rain opportunities and increased probabilities of, kind of average to slightly below average temperatures, with the ridge really starting to build and kind of maximizing over the top. And by then we could be looking at some record high temperatures up there in Canada, complements of that dominant ridge building across that region. And again, we take the breakdown and where we are now and where we are in the first week of June with the complements of that kind of recurving typhoon that's going to be taking place. That's going to be activating that kind of that same type of weather pattern that we've seen with that persistent southerly flow, and storms are going to kind of blow up in a lot of the same areas they are expected in the next couple of days. So by the time we get into the June 2nd through the 5th, 6th time frame, we see above average rains in a good part of Wyoming, back into eastern portions of Colorado, back into western portions of Nebraska, into Kansas, but especially into the Texas Panhandle, with well above average rains, where these mesoscale systems kind of blow up and they form off into the heat of the afternoon, head southeast across the northwest flow, and then they'll start to fizzle out as they head towards maybe eastern Texas, north Texas, but down here into central Texas, with diminishing, weakening thunderstorms. But mainly the main activity is going to be really highlighted across the eastern portions of the Rockies, but especially into the Texas Panhandle. And we look beyond that and look at some of the precipitation anomalies really from now until June 10th. And we've kind of see this kind of persistent system, these patterns kind of really taking shape, and going forward, it's not really going to go anywhere. So we have that low pressure across a good part of, West Virginia, the Carolinas back into Virginia. We got the dominant ridge of high pressure really activated, and a lot of sinking air. This area is going to really start to dry out across the good part of the upper Midwest. And then we just have that persistent southerly flow off the Gulf, and the ridging, with the storms that blow up across, east of the Rockies here, puts this well above average, precipitation anomalies. And then again, with the ridging over the top, that puts the above average precipitation anomalies across portions of Nevada, getting into Idaho, back into Montana, as well as into Wyoming. And we see the same thing on the GFS ensembles, kind of implying the same thing. So we see this kind of persistent setup of where we are now, really locked in for the next couple of weeks. I don't really see this changing kind of anytime soon. I think longer term, as we get towards the middle of June, I think this pattern starts to break down a little bit, with maybe a trough that comes in across the upper Midwest as the ridge will start to shift back over portions of the Pacific Northwest. And then maybe longer term too, I am looking at possibly ridging starting to build over a good part of Texas down there once we get past the middle of June, heading towards portions at the end of June. They might see that ridge starting to build over Texas as their temperatures start to surge in a big way as they head towards the end of June. But that is definitely a long ways off. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate you watching the video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch me next update while I protect you before and after the storm.